Okay, so this is the fourth video. Today I'm going to work on mounting the shocks and building the shock tower bracket. Before we do that, I just want to talk about the ride height on the snowmobile. The previous two builds I did had a ride height of 7.5 to 8 inches. This one, when stock, it had a ride height of around 10.5 inches. So when I built everything, I built it, according to that ride height. And now that I've got the front end kind of set up, other than the shocks, I was looking at the tie rods and things like that, and there's a few issues, and that comes from having the ride height that high. So I think the solution is going to be is I'm going to go ahead and just drop the ride height to what the other two sleds were, around 8 inches, and that should take care of a lot of the issues. But I'll go ahead and show you what some of the issues are. And so the first issue is this here. So I have the steering wheel straight and I have the ski straight, and this white line represents the tie rod end where it's going to bolt into this hole. It fits there fine, but the problem is if I turn the bars right, this goes up, so now I'm hitting on the frame right here, which I don't want to do. And as this turns right, it actually gets further away down here, and there's too much of a distance here. So what I'm going to do is, by dropping the ride height down to where see how that comes down, that whole thing comes together now on that turn. So that's the first issue. The second issue is we go back up to the original ride height of 10.5 inches. The shocks kind of tilt out at the front from the rest of the snowmobile, and I don't know how that's going to affect it as far as things binding, but I know I don't like the way it looks. So what I'm going to do is, if I drop this again down to that 8-inch ride height, you'll see how the shocks move forward, and they come closer to the snowmobile up here, which is what I want to do, because my bracket's going to come off here and then come up here. So those are the two issues. And the only problem with this whole situation now is the ski stance is now too wide, because as it goes up, the skis goes in. But as I drop it down to that ride height, now the skis open up too much. And I get outside to outside, I have like 29.5 inches or something. And I want to try to keep it around 27.5. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to cut these off again and cut them down, and then re-weld them onto the bushings when I bring the ski stance in, like I did in the previous video. So yeah, kind of sucks, but is what it is. And I'm just glad I can keep you guys from making the same mistakes. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that, get that all put together, and then I'll show you how I mounted the shocks and how I build the shock tower. All right, so just about ready to go ahead and mount the shocks, but before we do that, we have to build a block-off plate. I don't know if you can see it from that angle, but as you turn the steering wheel to the right, this protrudes past here, the face of this, and this has to get blocked off to keep the snow from coming in later. So we need to fabricate a plate that covers all this, comes across the top here, and it also allows this to stick out to that point. So what I did is I just made a cardboard template, and then I marked it right where the pivot started here, and then on the other side where the tie rod comes through. I also flipped this bolt because this bolt, the nut was up here and it stuck up too far, so I just flipped it down like that. So what you want to do is make yourself a cardboard template, and then once you do that, I made another cardboard template, and this goes, let's see if you can see it better from here. You can see how when you turn this to the right, that protrudes through. So we have to make something to cover that up. So I have this template here. It goes on something like that. So it's a lot easier to make it all out of cardboard and then do it out of metal. So after I made the template, I went ahead and traced that out onto a piece of metal, this here. And that's going to go right there. And then again, you have to go from this point to this point and make sure it's straight across, because that's where your cowling is going to sit on your belly pan after. But you want to make sure that when you turn that, it doesn't hit. And then after that's done, you're going to take these little pieces here, a little triangle, and that's going to go right on top. I'm just going to tack weld that all in, and then I have another one that's going to go up underneath for the bottom, tack weld all that in, and that way when that's all said and done, you can still turn that. You have your bump out, but it's going to keep snow from coming through here later on. So it's a lot easier to do the bracket now, to do the block off plate now before you put the shocks and everything else in the way. So now as far as the shocks go, you're going to go ahead and drill a hole right between these two radius arms. I actually have two here because the first one I drilled, it set the shock too low, and the bigger, fatter part of it, this part of it here was hitting, this part was hitting on this. So I had to move the whole thing up. So now the center hole is here, and this part doesn't interfere with this here. Also, this is where I use those spacers that I was talking about that I cut from the radius arm pivot points. And they work really good because you just have to chase them with a 3/8 inch bit, and they're perfect. These are 1/2 inch, but they were just a little bit too short because the shock was still hitting this bolt here. So I went ahead and I put just a small washer on the other side of that. So I'll go ahead and mount the shocks on both sides, and then we'll show you how to do the tops. All right, so I got the shocks mounted on the bottoms here. I have the spacer here, and then the washer as well against there. And you can see I have just enough room between that bolt and the shock to keep it from hitting. So now what I'm going to do, I made 1/4 inch steel plates, and these ones measure 5 inches. Then center to center on these holes, it's 3 9/16. And then on the holes, I came in from the edge 3/4 and up 9/16 on both of them. That's to keep it far enough away from here so that when the shock's pivoting, going through its cycle, it's not hitting on there. You can even just nip that with a 45-degree angle if you wanted. But I have that, so that measurement works well because it keeps the shocks far enough this way and leaves you room to put a little headlight in here and put a little headlight in here. The halogen ones are about the size of the tape measure. So if you put your headlights right there, you'll have enough room for them. That's why I moved this thing, a little bit close. So I'll go ahead and I got to bolt these up, and then we got to figure out where our shock tower mount is going to come, what the depth of it and the height of it's going to be. Also, I put this 1/4 inch plate on here. I probably could have gone 3/16. 1/4 inch is probably a little overkill, but just mount those. And then on this, I actually had to trim it because I had it too high. Because when your plate came, when this piece went in, this was actually hitting this. So I had to go ahead and trim that. So another good reason to have this is to make sure that everything works with your shocks. And you don't have, put the shocks on and have something in the way after when you're trying to make this plate. So that's that. So I'll go ahead and bolt these up. And then we'll see if we can get it all centered, and then mark the arm that's going to go down. All right, so I got the top plate mounted at the top of the shocks. You can tell this is a little crooked right now. You can get it close by just tightening up the bolts and kind of moving it around. It doesn't have to be perfect yet. It just has to be kind of set where it's got to go, because these are tight here and it's holding it all together. It's holding it together, so that way it's not going to bind any more than it has to. So what I'm going to do is we're going to put this bracket together like this, and it's going to go right here. So in order to determine the length from here to this plate, I'm going to put this here, pinch it, hold it tight. I'll put a clamp on it to hold it tight. So now that I have it in there, you can just barely make it out on the other side of the shock. The back side of this mount to that plate is 1.5 inches. Check it at the top, like 1 7/16, 1.5 inches. So it's almost parallel to this plate here. It's not quite, but close enough where we can just make this a true 45. So I'm going to go from that plate to the short point of my 45 for this bottom piece, 1.5 inches, and then I'm going to go ahead and weld that to that. Okay, I have this welded up, so I'm just going to slip it right in there and push it up against that plate, and it actually fits pretty nice. Next thing you have to do, which I already did, is determine where you're going to cut this. So you want to slide this up and down on this plate to a height where you're happy, and then once you get it where you're happy, just make a mark on this. We left this was a little bit long, so it's stuck up a little, so you get that where you want, and then you go ahead and you mark that, take that over and cut it. That's how I got that height on that. The other thing is, now with this whole assembly here, you want to push this tight to that plate and try to get a clamp on it. And at this point, the shocks are only there to hold this bracket. And once I have it there where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and just eyeball the center of it and put this clamp on the bottom. You can actually get it in right behind the 1/4-inch steel plate. Get it clamped on there. Measure it, both sides, at 11/16 both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and really crank this one down now. I'm going to pull this off. So now I'm going to go ahead and try to get this thing lined up this way. So with this here, nice and tight, I think I can measure right from this hole to the corner of that, 11 1/4. Actually, let me just pull the shocks out of the way for a second. So what we're trying to do now is we're just trying to get this nice and straight. So if I measure from the center of this hole to the corner of that, I have 11 1/4 to this side. So I go over here and do the same thing. I have 11 7/16. So I want to just tweak that over a little bit. And I got 11 5/16 there. 11 5/16. All right. So now I'm going to stand back and look at it. You can actually eyeball it right against the steering post. But if it looks straight, you can see the steering post off to the left. You can see how it kind of parallels that. And it looks straight to me, so I'm going to go with it. I'm going to go ahead and weld that in there, and then we'll put the top plate on for the shock mounts, weld that on the front side, and then it's almost ready to go. All right, so that's the bracket. I'll weld it to the steel plate. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put just a piece of steel between here and here, going this way, just as a gusset, and weld that all in there. And I think what I'm going to end up doing is tying this from here over to here. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is before you get going on all this, if your shocks are adjustable, make sure the center to the center on both shocks are the same. If you start measuring and one's different than the other, it's going to throw things out of whack. So just wanted to point that out. Now this here, she's standing under her own weight. Shocks move up and down. So the other thing I have to do is install the tie rods, which I got these off of Amazon. Don't ask me what link it is, but they're just search go-kart tie rods, 11-inch. They work perfect for this. They almost fit as is. But what I usually do, they're pretty close now, but you can move this. You can pick this up off the threads and move it that way and then set it back down on the threads, and you'll get that. It'll actually set in further that way, so you can make that connection without having to undo the tie rod too far. You want to make sure it has enough threads inside And in these, I just push the boots in. That should keep the snow out. Now what I'll probably end up doing is maybe I'll bring a piece of reinforcement from this point here to this point. If you look down on it, it'll go. Let me grab something here. You can tie this in with something like this, from there to there, and then do the same thing on this side, and that'll give it a little extra support from moving side to side. But as it is now, it's pretty rigid. I'm just not 100% sure on how this is going to hold up after time, if this is going back and forth. It may be fine. I don't know. I'll leave that up to you. So that's about it for now. You got plenty to get you going if you're going to do this. I'll see you on the next one.